I first noticed it on a mundane Tuesday evening while the city yawned its way into twilight, the sky a sprawling canvas of purples and oranges melting into the horizon. My apartment, perched on the third floor of a nondescript building on the edge of the city, was my sanctuary from the relentless pace of life. The rooms were small but cozy, with walls lined with bookshelves groaning under the weight of well-worn novels and a few cherished trinkets from my travels. The windows, large and welcoming, allowed the dying sunlight to stream in, casting gentle patterns on the hardwood floor. Life in the apartment was marked by a comforting routine. Work at the publishing house occupied my days, and the evenings were reserved for reading, sometimes writing, and a cup of chamomile tea before bed. There was a sense of quiet predictability that I cherished, a rhythm that lulled me into a peaceful state of mind. But as twilight descended that evening, I felt an anomaly, a slight disruption in the air, as if the apartment were holding its breath. I dismissed it at first, attributing the sensation to the peculiar effects of exhaustion. But as I settled into my armchair with a book, the feeling of being watched crept upon me. It was subtle, like the whisper of a breeze, but persistent, weaving itself into the very fabric of my thoughts. I glanced around, expecting to see nothing but the familiar shadows pooling in the corners. Yet, there was something different, something darker amidst the shapes. In the corner of the living room, just beyond the reach of the lamp's soft glow, a shadow lingered. It seemed denser, deeper than the others, its edges almost blurred, as if its form were uncertain, wavering between being and not being. It was oddly shaped, neither adhering to the contours of the furniture nor to the natural play of light and dark. Its presence was unsettling, but rationality assured me it was a trick of the light, a confluence of shadows that happened to form an unnerving silhouette. Pushing the unease aside, I returned to my book, though my concentration faltered. The shadow loomed at the edge of my vision, a reminder of an enigma I couldn't explain. Over the next few days, the shadow remained, a silent observer that never strayed from its corner, but seemed to grow in its awareness of me. I found myself watching it more often than not, a quiet weariness building within me. At night, as I lay in bed, I could feel it through the walls, a darkness more profound than the night itself, hanging over my consciousness like a velvet shroud. Slowly, life in the apartment shifted. The once comforting sanctum became a landscape riddled with tension. My dreams, once vivid and full of narrative, grew fractured and restless, haunted by glimpses of that shadowy figure. It stood at the periphery of each dream, a silent sentinel that seemed to exude an air of expectation. Then, the disturbances began. At first, they were minor. The soft creak of floorboards, the subtle rustle of curtains where no breeze stirred. Doors would be slightly ajar in the morning when I was certain they had been closed. Books from my shelves would lie open on the floor, pages splayed like pleading hands. I reasoned with myself, attributing these events to forgetfulness or drafts, but the logical explanations felt hollow, unconvincing. The more I tried to ignore it, the more insistent it became. The shadow expanded its reach, spreading its tendrils into every corner, casting a pall over the daylight hours. I could feel its presence now, almost tangible, a silent companion that never left my side. My friends noticed a change in me, their inquiries gentle but probing. I deflected their concerns with assurances that everything was fine, though my heart knew otherwise. The tension escalated one evening as I returned home from work. The apartment was dark, the shadows pooling like ink in the corners. I flicked the light switch, but the bulb flickered and died with a faint pop. The darkness seemed to deepen, swallowing the faint remnants of daylight that filtered through the windows. I could feel it, the shadow, more present than ever, its awareness like a chilling breath against my skin. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak light to navigate through the living room. As the beams swept across the walls, I caught a glimpse of movement, subtle but unmistakable. The shadow seemed to shift, its form undulating, and for a fleeting moment, I could swear it was looking back at me. My pulse quickened, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. Desperation drove me to seek answers. I combed through books and articles, delving into the arcane and esoteric, searching for anything that could explain the entity that had invaded my life. Late into the night, I read about shadow figures, tales of their elusive nature, and the fear they instilled. Some were benign, the stories said, mere echoes of emotions past. Others were malevolent, harbingers of despair and madness. The thought of confronting it, of banishing it, played on my mind. I pondered rituals and chants, symbols and protections, anything that might reclaim my home from the oppressive entity. But a deeper part of me wondered if it was already too late, if the shadow had woven itself into the very essence of my being, an inseparable part of my reality. It was during one of these solitary vigils, the apartment illuminated only by the moon's ghostly light, that I felt a shift. The air grew still, heavy with anticipation. The shadow, now more defined, moved, slipping from its corner and stretching across the room. It was no longer content to merely watch. It sought acknowledgement. I stood frozen, caught between fear and an inexplicable compulsion to understand. The shadow seemed to pulse, its form swirling like smoke caught in a draft. I could sense an intelligence behind it, probing, searching. And then, a whisper, a voice without sound, a thought that wasn't mine, slid into my consciousness. We are bound. The words reverberated through me, echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. I staggered back, nearly dropping the book I had clutched like a talisman. The shadow loomed before me, its presence overwhelming, a void that threatened to consume me. Yet, within that void, I glimpsed something else, a flicker of recognition, a connection that defied logic. In that moment of clarity, I understood. The shadow, this entity that had haunted my waking hours and invaded my dreams, was a part of me. It reflected my fears, my anxieties, the pieces of myself I had long buried in the recesses of my mind. It was a manifestation of the darkness I carried, the unresolved fragments of my soul seeking expression. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. I could no longer deny its presence, nor could I escape it. The shadow retreated, sinking back into the corner from whence it came, its form settling into a familiar silhouette. Yet, it no longer felt alien. In its depths, I could see my own reflection, a mirror to the facets of myself I had ignored for too long. Days passed, and the apartment gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. The shadow remained, but its presence no longer gripped me with fear. Instead, it served as a constant reminder of the balance between light and dark, of the need to face one's inner demons rather than flee from them. The disturbances ceased, the air lightened, and my dreams, while still shadowed, carried a new sense of understanding. And yet, lingering at the edges of my consciousness, the fear persisted, not of the shadow itself, for I had come to accept it as a part of me, but of what it represented, the unknown depths within us all. The apartment, with its creaking floorboards and gentle rustles, had become a sanctuary once more, albeit a haunted one, where the line between reality and the subconscious was forever blurred. In quiet moments, when the world outside hushed into stillness, I could feel the shadow watching, a silent guardian of the secrets I held. It had become a companion on my journey through this tangled web of existence, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, there is a whisper of truth, a flicker of light that guides us back to ourselves. There was something comforting about the way sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains of my apartment, the delicate fabric casting soft shadows on the hardwood floor. I had chosen this place for its quietude, nestled at the edge of town where the hustle and bustle seemed a distant echo. The building was old, with creaky wooden floors and a history that was, in its own unassuming way, rich with the tales of those who had come and gone. My life was one of routine. I worked from home, writing articles for a niche magazine. My days were spent in quiet contemplation, punctuated by the occasional sound of a bird taking flight or a neighbor's muffled footsteps in the corridor. The apartment itself was modest, a kitchen that flowed into a small living room, a bedroom just large enough for a queen bed and a desk, and a window that offered a view of the sprawling forest beyond the town's edge. It was on one such calm, ordinary day that I first noticed something strange. It began with a subtle shift in the air, a tingling of awareness at the nape of my neck that made me pause mid-sentence. I dismissed it as nothing more than fatigue and returned to my work, the tactile rhythm of typing lulling me back into focus. As the weeks passed, the sensation grew more pronounced. There were moments when I felt eyes on me, an unshakable conviction that I was being watched. It was irrational, I told myself. The building was secure, the locks sturdy, and my neighbors were few and far between. Yet, I couldn't deny the sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of my peace. One evening, as twilight painted the sky with hues of indigo and gold, I sat by the window sipping a cup of chamomile tea. The tranquility of the scene outside, the gentle sway of trees, the distant call of an owl, only emphasized the discord within me. I glanced around the apartment, my gaze lingering on the shadows that pooled in corners. A chill whispered through the room, although no breeze moved the curtains. The first true disturbance came on a night bathed in silver moonlight. I awoke to the creaking of floorboards. At first, I thought it was a dream, the kind where you hover between wakefulness and sleep, reality and imagination blurred beyond recognition. But the sound was persistent, deliberate, as if someone or something was pacing just outside my bedroom door. Heart pounding, I sat up, straining to hear. The silence that followed was profound, stretching taut over the space like a thin veneer. Yet, beneath it, I sensed a presence, a weight in the air that pressed against my skin. Mustering courage, I flicked on the bedside lamp. The warm glow chased away the shadows, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. I told myself it was nothing, that old buildings had their quirks, and this was merely one of them. But the unease lingered, refusing to be banished by the light of day. Days turned into nights, each bringing its own share of unnerving moments. I would find objects moved from their places, books rearranged on the shelf, a chair slightly askew. Once, I discovered the window slightly ajar when I was certain I had locked it. A logical explanation eluded me, and each incident chipped away at my sense of security. It was during one of my sleepless nights, shrouded in the muffled silence of the early hours, that I first glimpsed it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding night, flitted across the hallway. I froze, breath caught in my throat, as it vanished into the depths of my apartment. In that moment, fear washed over me in cold waves, each more intense than the last. The logical part of my mind urged me to call someone, anyone, to come and investigate. But another part, the part that whispered of the supernatural, of things unseen and unexplained, held me back. Who would believe me? And what could they do against a shadow? As the days stretched on, the presence grew bolder. I would catch fleeting glimpses of it, always at the edge of my vision, a dark figure, human in form, but devoid of any distinguishing features, as if it were made of the night itself. It never approached me directly, always keeping its distance, yet its very existence was a violation, an intrusion into the sanctuary I had carved out for myself. I began to dread the coming of night, the way the setting sun would transform my haven into a place of whispered fears and unseen stalkers. Sleep became elusive, and when it did come, it was fragmented and filled with dreams that dissolved upon waking, leaving only a residue of anxiety. In my search for answers, I turned to the building's archives, hoping to unearth some clue about its past. What I found was a history marked by whispers of tragedy, a tenant who had disappeared without a trace, another who spoke of feeling watched before moving away abruptly. These stories, previously dismissed as urban legends, now seemed to resonate with my own experiences. One particularly overcast afternoon, when the sky was the color of slate and rain tapped softly against the window, I found myself drawn to the basement. The air was cooler there, damp with the scent of earth and aged wood. Old furniture and forgotten relics were strewn about, artifacts of lives once lived within these walls. It was then that I found it, an old, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The entries were sparse, often only a few lines, but their words painted a chilling picture. The writers spoke of a shadowy figure, a presence that haunted the periphery of their life, just as it now did mine. The journal's final entry was scrawled in a hurried, almost illegible hand. It watches me, waits in the spaces between thought and reality. I fear it is not bound by the same rules as we are. I felt a connection to the writer, a shared burden that transcended time. Yet, even as the discovery brought validation to my fears, it also deepened the mystery. What was this presence, and why did it haunt this place and its inhabitants? The days that followed the journal's discovery were marked by an escalation in activity. The shadows seemed to grow more daring, appearing more frequently, sometimes lingering in the corners of my vision. Its presence was oppressive, a constant weight on my consciousness that I could not shake. Then came the night that would change everything. I was sitting at my desk, trying in vain to focus on my work, when I felt an overwhelming compulsion to look out the window. The forest, usually a dark mass beyond the glass, seemed alive with movement. At first, I thought it to be a trick of the light, the wind stirring leaves into ghostly shapes. But as I watched, I saw it, the shadow, more defined than ever before, standing at the edge of the trees. It was watching me, I realized with a start, a chilling recognition settling in my bones. And then, without warning, it began to move toward the apartment, gliding over the ground with an unnerving grace. Panic surged through me, a primal instinct urging me to flee. But even as I turned away from the window, a deeper part of me knew it was futile. There was no escaping what was already here, what had always been here. The lights flickered, plunging the room into a brief, disorienting darkness. When they came back on, the shadow was gone, but the air was thick with its presence, a palpable reminder of its power. I spent the rest of the night in a state of hyper-awareness. Every creak, every rustle magnified 100-fold. The shadows seemed to dance at the edges of my vision, taunting me with their elusiveness. As the first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, I felt a tenuous sense of relief. But it was short-lived, for even in the light of day, I could feel it, an undercurrent of fear that threaded through my every thought, a constant reminder of the stalking presence that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. I realized then that there were no simple solutions, no easy exorcisms for what haunted me. The shadow was a part of this place, etched into its foundation like a dark secret. It was a tenant that paid no rent, a ghostly watcher in this haunted residence, and I was its latest captive, bound by a shared history of fear and fascination. In the end, I knew I could leave the apartment, seek refuge elsewhere, but the fear of the unknown, the lure of understanding, kept me rooted in place. For in the quietude of my mind, I understood that some shadows are inescapable, not because they are stronger, but because they are part of us, reflections of the fears we carry within. And so, I remained, a solitary figure in a dance with shadows, tethered by an invisible thread to the spectral presence that haunted the outskirts of my life. The wind was a gentle whisper against the stark silence of the isolated parking lot. It was an unusual place for introspection, and yet here I was, sitting in my car, the only vehicle under the dim, flickering streetlight. The parking lot was meant for the nearby hiking trails, now deserted, its visitors long gone as the sun descended, painting the sky with hues of deep orange and navy blue. I had always found comfort in solitude, but tonight something felt different, an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite place. The day had been ordinary, filled with routine tasks, and when the opportunity arose to escape into the embrace of nature, I seized it. I spent hours wandering the trails, feeling the soft crunch of leaves beneath my feet, the cool breeze tangling with my hair. As dusk fell, I felt a reluctance to leave the quiet sanctuary of the woods, leading me to linger in the parking lot, lost in thought. It was then that I noticed it. A movement, subtle and almost imperceptible, caught at the edge of my vision. I turned my head, expecting to see another latecomer to the trailhead, but the lot remained empty, my car the sole occupant. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my imagination, heightened by the encroaching darkness and my solitude. But the sense of being watched, of something hovering just beyond my perception, persisted. I shook my head and started the car, the engine's rumble breaking the stillness. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone, that some presence lingered in the shadows, watching me leave. The drive home was uneventful, the roads quiet, and the night air cool against the open window. Yet, the unease clung to me like a second skin. I arrived home, a small bungalow nestled in a quiet neighborhood, and locked the door behind me, feeling a strange sense of relief upon entering. I turned on the lights, welcoming the warm glow that chased away the remnants of the evening's disquiet. I attempted to distract myself with mundane activities, making dinner, flipping through channels on the television, even organizing the bookshelf. Despite my efforts, the unease had settled deep within me, refusing to be banished. It wasn't until I was preparing for bed that I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. My bedroom window, which I distinctly remembered closing before leaving for the trails, was slightly ajar. I hesitated, feeling a chill run up my spine. I approached the window cautiously, peering out into the night. The yard was empty, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, nothing out of place. I closed the window firmly and locked it, blaming my oversight on distraction. As I climbed into bed, I tried to dismiss the incident, reminding myself that there was a logical explanation for everything. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, but the night was restless, my dreams troubled by shadows that seemed to creep ever closer. Morning arrived with a sense of normalcy, the night's fears seeming foolish in the light of day. I went about my routine, the unease a distant memory as the sun rose higher in the sky. Work provided the distraction I needed, and by the time I returned home, the events of the previous evening had faded to little more than an odd, unsettling memory. But as night fell once more, the feeling of being watched returned with intensity. I pulled the curtains tightly, banishing the night from my view, yet the sense of a lurking presence remained. It was as if something had followed me from the parking lot, a shadow that had slipped into my life unnoticed. As I sat in the living room, the television casting flickering light across the room, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible creak, as if someone was treading lightly on the floorboards. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen, every instinct telling me that I was not alone. The noise came again, closer this time. I rose from the couch, moving cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for my phone, intending to call for help, but hesitated. Who would believe me? There was no proof of an intruder, no sign of forced entry, just a feeling, a creeping dread that wound itself around my heart. I steeled myself and moved through the house, checking each room methodically. The house remained empty, undisturbed, yet I could not shake the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. I returned to the living room, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, a trick of the mind fueled by fear and imagination. But as the night wore on, the sense of presence grew stronger, more insistent. I could feel it now, an oppressive weight bearing down on me, a shadow that whispered of malevolence and danger. I locked every door, checked every window, ensuring that no entry went unchecked. Yet the feeling persisted, a relentless specter that refused to be banished. Sleep was impossible, each creak and groan of the house sending my heart racing. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, waiting for dawn to bring relief. But as the first light of morning crept into the room, I knew that whatever haunted me would not be so easily dismissed. The following days passed in a blur, the sense of unease now a constant companion. I went through the motions of daily life, my mind preoccupied with the shadow that seemed to follow me everywhere. I could feel it even in crowded places, a presence that lingered at the edge of my consciousness. Watching, waiting, I began to fear the night, dreading the return home, where the presence was strongest. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, a manifestation of stress and anxiety. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had found me in that isolated parking lot, something that refused to let go. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my living room, the sound came again, louder this time, unmistakable. The creak of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above me. I froze, every nerve on edge, listening as the footsteps approached the stairs. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed my phone, dialing for help with trembling fingers. As I spoke to the operator, I could hear the footsteps descending, each step a deliberate echo in the silence. I backed away, heart racing, until I found myself pressed against the wall, the phone clutched tightly in my hand. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and an eerie silence descended. broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I waited, expecting the door to open, for the intruder to reveal themselves, but nothing happened. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence oppressive and heavy. When the police arrived, they found nothing amiss. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder, nothing to explain the footsteps I had heard. They assured me that it was likely my imagination, perhaps the house settling, but their words did little to quell the fear that had taken root deep within me. Alone once more, I sat in the quiet of my home, feeling the walls close in around me. The presence was still there, lurking, watching. I could feel it in every shadow, in every creak and groan of the house. It was a specter that refused to be banished, a shadow that would not let go. Days turned to weeks, and the presence remained, a constant, unwelcome companion. I found myself avoiding the house, staying out late, finding any excuse to keep the shadows at bay. But no matter where I went, the feeling of being watched persisted, a silent reminder of the shadow that had found me. I tried to confide in friends, to seek their reassurance, but found myself met with pitying smiles and gentle dismissals. It was all in my head, they said, a product of an overactive imagination. But I knew better. I knew that the shadow was real, that it had followed me from that parking lot, slipping into my life like a thief in the night. As time wore on, I learned to live with the shadow, to accept its presence as a part of my life. I moved through my days with a cautious awareness, always vigilant, always on edge. But even as I adapted, the fear never truly left, a lingering dread that whispered of unseen dangers and lurking threats. The shadow was a constant reminder of the fragility of my world, of the darkness that lay just beyond the light. It was a presence that refused to be ignored, a specter that haunted my dreams and waking hours alike. And though I tried to find solace in the routine of daily life, I knew that the shadow would always be there, watching from the shadows, waiting for the moment when I let my guard down. In the end, the shadow was more than just a presence. It was a part of me, a reflection of my deepest fears and insecurities. It was the unwelcome companion that I could never truly escape, a reminder that even in the brightest of places, the darkness was never far away. And as I stood at the edge of the parking lot once more, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I understood that the shadow would always be with me, a silent witness to the darkness that lay within. The evening sun bathed the suburban neighborhood in a warm amber hue, casting long shadows from the neatly trimmed hedges that lined the peaceful streets. My two-story house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a modest structure with an inviting front porch. Life in this sleepy suburb had always been comfortable, almost monotonous. The routine of daily life was a comforting rhythm, a rhythm I had come to depend on. I spent my days working from home, my office located on the second floor overlooking the backyard. It was a quiet existence, punctuated only by the occasional visit from my neighbor and friend, Jane, or the sound of children playing in the distance. My evenings were my own, usually spent with a book or indulging in old films. It was a life of tranquil solitude, a life that I cherished greatly. It was during one of these tranquil evenings that I first noticed something out of place. The neighborhood was settling into its nightly lull, the streetlights flickering on, casting pools of light on the pavement. I had just poured myself a cup of tea and settled into my favorite chair when I heard the sound, a soft rustle, like the wind stirring the leaves, but more deliberate somehow. I brushed it off at first, attributing it to the neighborhood cats or a stray branch caught in a breeze. But then it happened again. This time, it was accompanied by a shadow flickering across the wall opposite the window, a quick movement that caught my eye. I stood, peering out into the dusky evening. The street was empty, the only movement the gentle sway of trees. Yet, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, a lingering sense that something was amiss. As days turned to weeks, the disturbances became more frequent, more unsettling. Every night, around the same time, there would be a sound, a light tap at the window, the crunch of gravel underfoot, or the subtle creak of the porch steps. Each time I checked, there was nothing there, only the silent, empty street. The real terror began the night I saw him. I was in my office, the soft glow of the desk lamp my only light as I finished up some work. The window was open, letting in the cool night air. When I felt it again, that creeping sensation of being watched, I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the glass. And there he was. A figure stood motionless at the edge of my backyard, cloaked in shadow, nothing more than a silhouette against the night. My heart pounded in my chest, panic clawing its way up my throat. I blinked, my mind racing to rationalize what I was seeing. But when I looked again, he was gone, vanished as if he had never been there at all. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened alertness, my senses tuned to every creak and whisper. Sleep eluded me, my nights plagued by the thought of that figure returning. I installed heavier locks, closed the curtains tight, and considered installing a security system. Yet, something held me back, a part of me that clung to the idea that perhaps it was all in my head, a figment of an overactive imagination. But the figure returned, night after night, always at the periphery of my vision, slipping away before I could fully comprehend him. I confided in Jane, hoping to find solace in sharing my fears. She listened patiently, her eyes filled with concern, but there was little she could do beyond offering company and reassurance. As the encounters continued, an insidious paranoia took root. I began to question my own reality, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. I took to leaving lights on throughout the house, their glow a reassuring presence against the encroaching shadows. But even then, I felt him, his eyes, an unseen weight pressing down on me, suffocating in its intensity. It wasn't long before his presence escalated from the shadows into my home. It started with small things, a creaked floorboard, a misplaced item. Then I began to notice open doors I was certain I'd closed, the faint scent of cologne in rooms where no one had been. It was as though he was making himself known, little reminders that he could slip through my defenses unnoticed. I became a ghost in my own life, haunted by the dread that filled every waking moment. I no longer found peace in the familiar routines. Instead, each day was a countdown to night when the terror would resume. I considered reaching out to the authorities, but what could I say? I had no proof, no evidence beyond my own escalating fear. The climax came on a stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rumbling ominously in the distance. I sat in the living room, every light blazing, trying to lose myself in the comforting flicker of the television. But even the sound of laughter on the screen couldn't drown out the anxiety thrumming through my veins. A sharp knock at the door shattered the illusion of security, my heart leaping into my throat. I froze, every muscle tensed. The knock came again, insistent, almost mocking. I rose slowly, my feet moving of their own accord toward the source of my dread. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob, my mind screaming at me to stop. I opened the door a crack, peering into the rain-soaked night. There was no one there, only the howl of the wind and the empty street beyond. Relief washed over me, mingling with the adrenaline that still coursed through my system. I closed the door quickly, turning to lean against it, struggling to calm my racing heart. But then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh, the sound reverberating through the house. It was everywhere and nowhere, a chilling whisper that seemed to seep from the very walls. I backed away, my eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for the source. And then I saw him. He stood at the top of the stairs, his face obscured by shadow, but his presence undeniable. Fear gripped me, rooting me to the spot, my mind screaming for me to run, to escape. Yet, I remained frozen, helpless against the terror that had invaded my home. The figure moved, descending the stairs with a slow, deliberate grace. With each step, I felt the air grow colder, the room darker. I stumbled back, my hand finding the edge of the table, clutching it as if it might anchor me to reality. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his head tilted slightly as if contemplating me, my fate. The silence stretched between us, a taut, suffocating tension. I opened my mouth to scream, to demand answers, but no sound came out, my voice lost to the fear that choked me. Then, without a word, he turned and slipped into the shadows, vanishing into the night. The room seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting, leaving me trembling in its wake. The lingering fear didn't dissipate with his departure. It seeped into my bones, an unwelcome companion that followed me through the days. I changed the locks, installed cameras, did everything I could to reclaim my sanctuary. But the memory of his presence lingered, a constant reminder of vulnerability. I no longer felt safe in my own home. The walls that had once been my refuge now carried whispers of terror. I found myself jumping at the slightest sound, my mind always half expecting to catch a glimpse of him at the corner of my vision. Though he was gone, his shadow remained, an indelible imprint on my life. I clung to the hope that time might dull the edges of my fear, but deep down, I knew it would never truly leave me. He had changed me, shifted the very fabric of my reality, a phantom that haunted the recesses of my mind. The neighborhood returned to its quiet routine, unaware of the silent dread that lingered in my house at the end of the cul-de-sac. And while I continued with my daily life, a part of me remained ever vigilant, waiting for the night when he might return, a mysterious stalker who had left an indelible mark on my soul. I remember how peaceful my hometown seemed when I first moved back after years of working in the city. Nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, it held a comforting familiarity, a sense of belonging that I desperately needed after the chaos of urban life. The rhythm of the town was soothing, its quiet streets, the rustle of leaves, and the distant calls of birds made for a serene soundtrack to my days. I rented a small, modest house on the outskirts, surrounded by tall oaks that swayed gently with the wind. It felt safe, insulated from the outside world, a cocoon of tranquility where I could finally breathe. Those initial weeks were filled with an odd kind of joy. I indulged in long walks, explored forgotten trails I used to wander in my youth, and reacquainted myself with familiar faces. Some things had changed, of course. Old shops replaced by new ones. Childhood friends moved away or too busy with their own lives. Yet, the essence of the town remained unchanged, like a favorite book, well worn but still telling the same story. My house became a sanctuary. I loved the way sunlight filtered through the curtains in the morning, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. I took solace in the quiet evenings, sipping tea on the porch while watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink. Life felt manageable here, and for a while, I believed it always would be. Things began to shift in subtle ways, almost imperceptible at first. It started with a feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck, a sense of being watched. I dismissed it as nerves. After all, transitioning from a bustling city to a quiet town required adjustment. But as the days passed, the feeling grew more persistent. I found myself glancing over my shoulder during walks, my heart quickening at every rustle in the bushes. Then, I noticed small things around the house. A door slightly ajar when I knew I had closed it, a coffee mug left out that I was sure I had put away. Once, I found a picture frame slightly tilted, though I had never touched it. These were minor disturbances, easy to explain away in the light of day. Yet, they left an unease that I couldn't shake off. One evening, as I settled into bed, I heard it, a soft tapping against the window pane. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The logical part of my mind reasoned it was a branch, swayed by the wind. But when I peered through the curtains, the night outside was still. I saw nothing unusual, no signs of movement, yet the tapping persisted. Sleep became elusive. Each creak of the house seemed amplified, each shadow took on a sinister form. I found myself awake in the early hours, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my imagination was running wild in the isolation. Yet, the sensation of being observed never left me. As the weeks passed, the disturbances escalated. I received anonymous notes, cryptic messages scrawled in uneven handwriting. "I see you," one read. "Do you see me?" another taunted. They appeared in odd places, slipped under the door, pinned to the porch railing, once even tucked beneath my windshield wiper. I shared this with no one, kept it to myself, a secret fear that gnawed at my sanity. I started to notice familiar faces in unfamiliar places. A woman I once knew from school appeared frequently during my walks. always at a distance, always watching. Her presence was unsettling, her gaze unwavering, as if she knew something I didn't. When I approached her one day, determined to confront this eerie coincidence, she vanished around a corner, leaving me with only questions and a growing dread. The surveillance became more overt. One night, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. Low, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, every instinct screaming at me to remain silent. The footsteps continued for what felt like an eternity before fading into the night. I never saw who it was, never had proof beyond the sound that haunted my nights. In daylight, I attempted to reclaim normalcy. I went about my routine, frequented the local cafe, and tried to engage in small talk with neighbors. But beneath the veneer of everyday life, a current of fear ran deep. I was being watched, tracked, by someone who seemed to know my every move. The climax of this unnerving dance came unexpectedly. It was a cold, moonlit night when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and with it came a silence so profound it swallowed even my breath. I fumbled for a flashlight, my hands trembling as I swept the beam across the room. That's when I saw him, outside the window, a shadowy figure standing still as a statue. He was close enough to touch the glass, his features obscured by the night. My heart lurched into my throat as we locked eyes. There was a familiarity to him, a recognition that sent a chill down my spine. He was not just a stranger, he was someone I knew, or perhaps someone who knew me far better than I understood. His presence was a silent confirmation of every fear I had harbored. He didn't move, didn't gesture, just watched with an intensity that pierced through the barrier of glass. I stood frozen, flashlight shaking in my grip, the weight of his gaze pinning me in place. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the night as if he had never been there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, every creak of the house amplifying the dread that coiled in my stomach. Even when the sun rose, bathing everything in its golden light, the fear remained, a shadow cast over my once peaceful home. Days turned into weeks, and the visits ceased, the notes stopped. Yet, the fear lingered, woven into the fabric of my existence. I knew he was still out there, watching, waiting. The unnerving familiarity of his gaze haunted me, a reminder that I was never truly alone. I became a ghost in my own life, moving through the motions with an uncertainty that clung to each step. The town, once a refuge, now felt like a maze of watchful eyes and hidden dangers. Every face in the crowd was a potential threat, every shadow a lurking menace. Even now, as I sit on my porch, the sun setting in a blaze of color, I feel the weight of his gaze. Somewhere out there, he watches, a silent observer in the tapestry of my life. I have become a prisoner of my own mind, trapped in a web of paranoia and fear. The stalker had turned the tables, and I was left with only a chilling familiarity and the haunting suspicion that he was always closer than I dared to believe. The first night I noticed him, the air was crisp and the sky clear, a rarity for this time of year when mist usually clings to the edges of the countryside. I was staying at my friend Hannah's house, a rustic dwelling that stood alone amidst endless fields, a good mile from the nearest neighbor. It was the kind of place where the silence was only broken by the rustling of leaves or the occasional distant call of an owl. Hannah had invited me for a week, a chance to escape the relentless pace of city life. Her house was charming, with its wooden beams and creaky floorboards that spoke of decades, if not centuries, of history. This retreat was supposed to be a peaceful sojourn, a chance to recalibrate my senses amidst nature's serenity. I spent the days on leisurely walks or curled up in an oversized armchair with a book, enjoying the warmth of the fireplace that crackled with comforting familiarity. That first night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft noise, like a footstep, outside my window. It was so faint that I thought it might be my imagination. I was tired from the drive, and the fresh air had left me drowsy. I reasoned it was probably a deer or some other nocturnal creature that had wandered near the house. But then I saw him, a fleeting shadow at the edge of the garden, barely discernible against the night. It was a man, standing still, looking towards the house. The sight was unnerving, but I told myself it was nothing. Sleep overtook me, dragging me into the depths of oblivion. The following morning, the memory of the shadowy figure seemed surreal, something conjured by a half-awake mind. I mentioned it to Hannah over breakfast, more as a curiosity than a concern. She laughed lightly, reassuring me that the area was safe, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were rare. It's probably just a farmer, she said, or someone lost. They'll find their way. Comforted by her nonchalance, I pushed the incident to the back of my mind. The day passed uneventfully, a blur of sunlit walks and idle chatter. But as dusk fell, the sense of unease crept back. The house seemed different at night. Its comforting corners turned to shadowy alcoves, the silence deeper and more resonant than before. That night, the man appeared again. This time, he was closer, standing near the old oak at the center of the garden. I was sure it was the same figure, tall, with an indistinct outline that suggested both presence and absence, a paradox that gnawed at the edges of my sanity. I watched him for what felt like hours, the tension in the air palpable, until he melted back into the darkness. A prickle of fear skittered up my spine, and I checked the locks on the windows and doors. Hannah was already asleep, her soft breathing a counterpoint to my racing thoughts. I hesitated to wake her, feeling foolish and childish, as if I were spooked by stories told around a campfire. Instead, I lay awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house settling into the night. The third night, I couldn't ignore it any longer. He was there again, almost at the edge of the patio now. His stance was unnaturally still, like a statue that had been placed in the wrong setting. I tried to discern his features, but the darkness was impenetrable. My heart thudded in my chest, a drumbeat of anxiety that refused to abate. I called the police, my voice a whisper as if the man could hear me through the walls. They promised to send someone by, but out here, miles from nowhere, response times were slow. I watched from the window, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the figure outside unwavering in his silent vigil. Eventually, the distant flash of headlights signaled the arrival of a patrol car. I watched, breath held, as the officers swept their flashlights over the garden, scouring the shadows. They found nothing, not even footprints. "Are you sure you saw someone?" they asked gently, the doubt in their eyes reflecting the disbelief I felt in my own mind. Their departure left an emptiness that echoed through the house. Hannah, woken by the commotion, tried to console me. "You're just tired," she said. "This place can play tricks on the mind." Her words were meant to soothe, but they only fanned the flames of my unease. There was something wrong, something I couldn't articulate, but could feel with every fiber of my being. The following day, I scrutinized the garden in daylight. There were no signs of disturbance, no broken branches or trampled grass. It was as if the night had swallowed every trace of my nocturnal visitor. But his presence lingered, a shadow in the back of my mind that refused to fade. That evening, Hannah had to leave for a prior engagement, promising to be back by nightfall. Her absence left a void that was more profound than I expected. The house felt different without her calming presence, its walls closing in, filled with the whispers of the past. As darkness fell, the anxiety returned, sharper and more insistent. I paced the rooms, checking locks and peering out windows, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of my solitude. The call came just after midnight, a soft, insistent ringing that shattered the silence. I hesitated before answering, my hand trembling as I lifted the receiver. "Who is this?" The line crackled, static hissing like a snake, followed by a pause so long I almost hung up. Then, a voice, low and distorted, murmured three words that sent a chill through my core. "I'm watching you." I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked the locks again, paranoia making every shadow a potential threat. The man was back, closer now, as if my fear had drawn him nearer. The windows seemed to mock my attempts at protection, fragile barriers against the encroaching dread. I considered calling Hannah, but what could I say that wouldn't sound like madness? Instead, I sank into the armchair, the fire's glow my only comfort. and waited for dawn. The night stretched interminably, my eyes never leaving the window where the man stood, his presence an unwavering challenge to my sanity. When the first light of day crept into the sky, he was gone, leaving behind no trace but the lingering echo of his presence. Hannah returned, her cheerful demeanor a jarring contrast to my tension. I told her about the call, the words that had sent my world spiraling into chaos. Her brow furrowed, concern finally replacing skepticism. "We should call the police again," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't right." But when the officers returned, there was nothing to find, no evidence of the call, no footprints or signs of intrusion. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the shared look that suggested they were dealing with someone who'd let their imagination run wild. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. Each night, the man returned, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there, a relentless specter haunting my every waking hour. The calls came at sporadic intervals, always the same voice, always the same message. "I'm watching you." I tried to ignore it, to pretend I was unaffected, but the fear was insidious, creeping into my thoughts until every moment was tinged with dread. I lost track of time, days blurring into nights, until I was living in a constant state of twilight where reality and nightmare mingled indistinguishably. The climax came on the seventh night, an evening so heavy with tension it seemed to hum in the air. The man was closer than ever, standing at the foot of the garden steps, his form solid and undeniable. My phone rang, the sudden sound shattering the fragile calm I had clung to. This time, I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the man, my heart a wild creature trapped in my chest. The phone fell silent, replaced by a new sound, a soft tapping at the window. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. There was nothing there, but I knew, deep down, that the man was closer than ever. I moved through the house, a ghost in my own skin, checking locks and looking for any sign of entry. The night was alive with shadows, each one a potential threat, each corner hiding untold horrors. The tapping continued, a rhythmic reminder of my helplessness, until finally it stopped. Dawn came, pale and wan, revealing nothing but an empty garden, pristine and untouched. Yet I knew he had been there, felt his presence retreating with the night. Hannah's return brought a semblance of normalcy, but the fear was now a permanent fixture in my heart, a shadow that refused to be dispelled. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was over, that the man and the calls were figments of a tired mind pushed too far. But the fear lingered, a constant whisper that tainted every moment. I left Hannah's house, returning to the city and its comforting anonymity, yet the shadows followed me, invisible but undeniable. Even now, in the bustle of urban life, I catch glimpses of him in the periphery of my vision, a reminder that fear is a relentless predator, always watching, always waiting. The calls have stopped, but the words remain etched in my mind, a chilling echo that will never fade. "I'm watching you."